Hello, I'm Nick Sal. Welcome to my channel. Welcome back to my channel if you're a subscriber. We are reading The Return of the Indian, the second book of the Indian in the Cupboard series by Lynne Reid Banks, and we're on chapter 17, As Far as You Can Go. Would it work? How do I know? I never thought of it. We never asked ourselves whether the cupboard was part of what makes it happen. Maybe he's right. Maybe the cupboard's just a cupboard, and the magic thing is the key. They turned both at once to look at the chest. The top of it still had scattered bits of Kleenex, boxes, and other things on it. Omri went over to it and swept all this off. Then he opened it. It was full of his private stuff. It's not big enough to hold both of us at once. We couldn't both go together anyways, you wally. Why not? Then he realized. What do you think? Of course. Someone would have to stay behind or there'd be nobody to turn the key. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? They're like, they couldn't go back in time because someone has to turn the key to have it happen. Who'll try it first? Patrick was asking. Omri looked at him. Are you serious? You really want to try it? Of course. Don't you? Omri looked around the room. Despite irritations, he was happy with it, with his life. He wasn't eager to risk losing either of them. Have you thought about the dangers? Coward! No, I'm not. You're rushing in like you always do. Just stop and think a bit. First, if it does work at all, how can you be sure you'd go back to Little Bear's time, to his village and not somewhere else? You couldn't find yourself anywhere. You could find yourself anywhere. And any when. Patrick looked mulish. Apart from that, what about size? Size? Yes. If they reach us small, we'd reach them small. Wouldn't we? Of course, there was no plastic then. We'd have to be in dolls or totem poles or something. I don't think it's cowardly not to fancy waking up in an Indian village 200 years ago at the top of a totem pole. For answer, Patrick knelt down by the chest and started lifting things out of it. Give me a hand with all this rubbish, was all he said. Omri helped him silently until the chest was empty. Then he said, after all that, probably the key won't even fit this lock. His heart was pounding, and he hoped it wouldn't. Patrick got up and fetched the key. Without closing the lid of the chest, he put it in the lock and turned it. It turned easily. The lock part clicked. Patrick removed the key and looked at it. My guess is this key fits pretty well any lock, he said slowly. My guess is this key fits pretty well any lock, he said slowly. A little better. Omri took a deep breath. Once again, he was caught up in something he felt overwhelmed by. Who'll go first? I will, said Patrick. Wait a minute. What now? You've got to have something with you, something of Little Bear's. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a hope of finishing up in the right place. That's what I was thinking. If you had some object or item that belonged to that time that was going to head back there, then you, having no other point in time, would kind of travel with it. Again, this is like basically science fiction, fantasy stuff. So Patrick stopped. What have we got of his? The longhouse. That's no use. The longhouse was made here. He didn't bring it from his time. Then there's only the teepee. They looked over at Omri's desk. The tiny teepee stood up from the seed tray, its poles sticking through its top, its beautiful, bold animal designs on its cone-shaped panels. That came from somewhere else. The Iroquois didn't have teepees, only longhouses. Besides, we couldn't move that. Bright Stars is having her baby in it. Patrick said slowly, if I took her, I'd be sure to go back to the right place. She'd take me. Listen, it's her village. It's her place. It's not for the accident of you bringing them when you did. If not for the accident of you bringing them when you did, she'd be there now. I bet it's where she'd rather be, if you asked her. Didn't you see how she was begging Little Bear just before she left? But he wanted... Listen, shut up. You're always arguing. I've made up my mind. Wait. Listen, it's her... Okay. Patrick, you can't. Take her into the... I'm sorry, I missed a sentence. Please forgive me here. Patrick said slowly, if I took her, I'd be sure to go back to the right place. She'd take me. And then I missed that Omri said, Patrick, you can't. Take her back into the middle of a battle? Listen, it's her village. It's her place. If not for the accident of you bringing them when you did, she'd be there now. I bet it's where she'd rather be if you asked her. Didn't you see how she was begging Little Bear just before he left? See, I got the voices right now. But he wanted... Listen, shut up. You're always arguing. I've made up my mind. I'm not going to miss this chance. I want to see the battle. Don't let's have a fight over it, or somebody's sure to get hurt. And it might not be one of us. And he went to the desk and fetched the seed tray and brought it back and laid it carefully in the bottom of the chest. Omri watched, feeling terribly agitated. He wanted to fight Patrick, but that was impossible now. He should have done it earlier. Now, if they started struggling, something awful would happen to Boone or Bright Stars. His mind was racing. I'm the one who will have the key, he thought. He would have control. He could send them for 5 minutes, or 1 minute, or less. And then, just by turning the key in the lock again, he could recover them. That was how it worked. What could happen in such a short time? And he couldn't help admiring Patrick's courage. Omri admitted to himself that he would not have been willing to go first, and not just because of Bright Stars either. Patrick climbed into the chest and crouched down. Like, is this really going to happen? I don't remember how this book goes. I'm reading this kind of right along with you, so, oof. Here, he said, handing Omri the key. Close the lid and send me. Touch the teepee with one finger, said Omri. Okay, I am. Now. Patrick's voice was trembling a little, but not much. What about Boone? He said he felt bad and wanted to help. Send us, will you? Before I lose my nerve. Omri closed down the lid, put the key in the lock, and locked the chest. It was such a simple action. What had it caused? After a moment, he unlocked the chest again and with icy cold hands opened it. He didn't know what to expect. Would Patrick have disappeared? Patrick lay inside it. At least, his body lay there. Omri reached in and touched him. He felt cold. Patrick! Patrick! But he was not really expecting a response. Patrick was as far away as anyone could be who isn't actually dead. Down in the bottom of the chest, near Patrick's unconscious head, was the seed tray. Patrick's limp hand was resting on it. Everything else on it was the same. The grass patch, the longhouse, the pool, except for one thing. The teepee was made of plastic. The paintings on it were crude, mass-produced. The poles were pink and molded in one with the tent. Gently, Omri lifted it. What he saw underneath gave him the biggest shock he'd had yet. The plastic figure of an Indian girl lay on a pile of cotton bedding. A cowboy was kneeling by her on one knee. In his arms was a tiny, naked plastic baby, smaller than Omri's little fingernail. Wow. Can you imagine seeing something? Just even seeing those as figures in general is pretty unusual, remarkable, but knowing that they were like real characters. Anyway, Omri gasped. Then on impulse, he reached in and lifted the seed tray and its contents out of the chest. Then he slammed down the lid and turned the key. About half a minute had passed since he had sent Patrick. At once he heard him moving inside and threw back the lid. Patrick raised his head. His face was white and dazed. "Don't," he gasped. "What happened?" said Omri. "I'd hardly got there. It's fantastic. Listen, I was part of the teepee." "What?" I can't explain. I was in the teepee. Not in it. I was it. I was on the outside of it. I could see everything. The places, I hadn't time to look properly. I could just... Send me back, will you? Send me back now. He reached up and tried to pull down the lid, but Omri braced himself against it. "Get out. It's my turn." "You didn't even want to go." "Well, I do now." Now he knows that it works or whatever. Omri was almost unable to speak for excitement. He was trying to drag Patrick bodily out of the chest. Patrick, resisting, grated out, "Leave off. Listen, I heard a baby crying in the teepee. I know, it's Bright Stars. Get out, will you? Were you small? I don't know how big I was, but I couldn't move. Listen, it's not fair. Let me go back. Let me stay for a bit. You hardly let me. I've got to see, Omri said frenziedly. Let me just look. Give me 5 minutes by your watch. Then you can have 5. I swear. Patrick gave way. He changed places with Omri. You'd better take the teepee. The teepee won't work now. All that will happen is you'll bring them back. I've got her moccasins in my pocket. Those ought to do. Go on. Get on with it. 5 minutes, said Patrick, and locked the chest. There wasn't a second in which to catch a breath or even feel scared. Omri was curled in the dark innards of the chest. He heard the lock click, and then immediately he felt sunlight shining on him. He tried to open his eyes, but found they were already open. At any rate, he could see, and he could hear. That was all he could do. He not only couldn't move, he couldn't try to move. He didn't even feel uncomfortable or as if he were tied up. He just had nothing to move with, and that was it. Spread out before him was a ruined Indian village. It was evening. The sun was a red ball sinking towards the rocky edge of a hill. The village in the clearing in a forest of pine and maple trees. The maples were all the colors of fire. It was as if the fires in the village, which had now burnt out, had kindled more fires in the surrounding woods. I think he's talking about fall colors. You know how that can get, especially in the Northeast. There were few longhouses left standing. Many had been burnt to the ground. They had stopped smoldering, but their blackened ruins gave the view a look of desolation. A number of women were moving about. Some were carrying water. Some were cooking. Others were helping injured men. There were Indian children of all ages, and quite a few dogs. Hardly any young men. Omri could see no signs of anything resembling a battle. What had become of the troop of well-armed Indians they dispatched less than an hour ago? Had they gotten lost on the way? Suddenly he heard a sound from behind him. It was unmistakably a strange, chuckling cry of a newborn baby. Omri tried to look round, but found he couldn't. Whatever he was stuck to the outside of the teepee, and that meant he couldn't see in. A very queer and comic thought came to him. I wonder if I'm the beaver or the porcupine. If you remember, those were the two paintings on the outside of the teepee. He didn't have time to consider this before he heard Boone's voice. He sure is a fine little fella, he said. His voice was choked with emotion. Everything just where it ought to be. Now you give him a swig of milk, ma'am, and I'll go ask the boys for something for you to get your strength back. There was a movement to Omri's left, and Boone came into view, blowing his nose and wiping his eyes. Amazingly, he was full size. Or no, of course, that wasn't amazing at all, because they're back in their normal times. A fine little fella, he was muttering to himself, sniffling and shaking his head. Gee whiz, ain't nature wonderful? I can hardly... He stopped dead and stared around him in horrified astonishment. Holy jumping catfish! Where am I? Omri was aching to tell him, but he could no more talk than he could move. However, Boone was no fool. He realized soon enough what had happened. After a few seconds spent taking in the scene, he turned and dived back into the teepee. Fortunately, no one had seemed to have seen him. Hey, little lady, do you know where we're at? I do believe you're in your village. No. Now, don't you go getting up. Gee, I shouldn't have ought to told you. A moment later, Bright Stars emerged, her baby in her arms. She looked tired and a bit bedraggled, but otherwise fine. Beautiful. Omri, who had only seen her tiny till now, had never appreciated how beautiful she was. An Indian woman was passing. She noticed Bright Stars and reacted to the baby. She called to others. Soon there was a crowd of women around Bright Stars, much chattering talk and a lot of pointing, all westward towards the setting sun. Omri hoped Boone would have the sense enough to stay in the teepee, and he did. After a minute or two, Bright Stars moved to go back in. Several of the other women wanted to come with her, but she sent them away. Now Omri strained to hear the conversation in the teepee behind him. "What's going on?" asked Boone as soon as she re-entered.
"Women say, strange thing happened. Little Bear come with many brave. Go to hill. Wait for new attack."
"What attack?" asked Boone in alarm.
"Soldier may not come back. Algonquin come. Take women, food, furs."
"They didn't get any loot when they come last time?"
"No. Iroquois fight. Drive off. Algonquin burn. Kill some. Get nothing. Now village wait. Little Bear wait in hills. Algonquin come back when sun go."
"But the sun's almost gone now," said Boone, his voice going squeaky.
"Yes," said Bright Stars quietly.
After a moment, Boone's voice said, "Ain't you skeered? With your baby and all?"
Bright Stars didn't answer. After a while she said, "Little Bear near, and great spirits. No bad come."
Omri's eyes, or the porcupines or the beavers, whatever he was looking through, were fixed on the sun. It was sinking behind the rocky hillside so fast he could see it move. Only a jagged slice of it was left. Darkness was coming, and his 5 minutes was more than up. Why hadn't Patrick taken him back? And that's the end of that chapter. Stay with us as I post new videos every week, and the next one will be Algonquin. We'll find out. Is Omri going to get back? What's going to go on when the Algonquin come? Are we going to see some modern weapons against the Native Americans of a couple hundred years ago? Stick with me to find out. Thanks for reading with me.